But I appreciate all of you being here with us today. On behalf of Hospice of the Piedmont and Hospice of Randolph, welcome to the E-Series, an educational webinar series aimed at engaging our community, exploring relevant topics, and educating about ways to connect with our organization. My name is Ryan Biagini, Director of Community Engagement and Education, and I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. Today's webinar, Cultivating Hope in Challenging Times, will be a conversation with bereavement counselors Lesia Lancaster, Patti Bagwell, and Cathey Floyd. They are all nationally certified, licensed clinical mental health counselors in the state of North Carolina. Lesia attended Liberty University and received a Master's of Arts degree in professional counseling and has been working with Hospice of Randolph since January of 2020. Prior to joining the Hospice of Randolph staff, Lesia worked at Lorvin Child and Family Development as a family counselor and trauma therapist. Cathey attended graduate school at Lenore Ryan University and received her Master's of Arts in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. Patti received her master's degree in Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Wake Forest University. They have both been with Hospice of the Piedmont since January 2018. Prior to joining Hospice of the Piedmont, Patti and Cathey worked at Wake Forest Medical Center in Winston-Salem, supporting patients on internal medicine, the burn unit, and the trauma center, focusing on substance abuse counseling and crisis intervention. We are thankful to have all three of these very gifted women with us today. During today's discussion, if you have any questions, please log them into the Q&A section, which can be found at the bottom of your screen. We will set aside time to address these at the end of the session. You may also choose to log any additional comments in the chat section. Now, without any further ado, let's begin today's discussion. And we'll start with you, Patti. What is it you do day to day as a bereavement counselor with Hospice of the Piedmont?
Well, Ryan, I think it might be best to convey what my day-to-day is like by sharing some stories of what it looks like to engage in grief counseling. Oftentimes, affirm people, clients, future clients, for even taking that first step, that initial step to reach out to the Grief Counseling Center to say, you know, I need help and support, because I think that does take a lot of courage to be able to do that. So one client session, I may be counseling a young woman in her late 20s who's coping with the unexpected loss of her best friend. And she's trying to make meaning out of the experience and coming to realize that she wants to invest in those major relationships in her life now, because that's at the top of her priority list. I may be in another session with a man who's nearing retirement age, and he's lost his wife. So everything that he had planned for the future, all his hopes, his dreams with his wife have radically shifted. And he's having to switch gears and adjust and really work through a lot of that. And he may be outwardly expressing his grief by creating a butterfly sanctuary out in his backyard to honor his wife, because he's found that that's a place of peacefulness where he can find peace and feel that presence of his wife there. So that may be something that someone would do, like I said, to outwardly express that grief and to work through that. I may be in a grief counseling support group, like loss of spouse or loss of significant other. And I may be seeing members of the group form these really intimate connections and really come alongside each other and support one another, and just really creating these special bonds because they're living this shared experience, right? Not that each person's experience is the same, but really being able to connect and provide each other with that emotional support that they really need during that time. I may be in another session with a young woman who lost her mother, and she's made the decision to go back to college and finish her college degree. So I may be celebrating with her because she's finished her first semester and made all A's. And she really made that decision to go back and do that because she knew that's what her mother would have wanted for her. So, so it's things like that that we see in our day-to-day. It's varied and different.
Yes, it seems like there is no 2 days alike, and that your coping strategies, change from person to person, and that is it's a great gift you offer your clients. I imagine over the past 6 months, this pandemic has changed things quite a bit. I'm curious if you could speak to how individual counseling has looked different due to the pandemic.
Yes, so we have, I think, transition, and that's the most significant change we've seen, is we've had to transition to virtual counseling sessions and phone sessions. So I think the delivery and how we provide services is definitely different. We're still doing the same thing and being able to provide those services to people that need them during this time. And I think we've seen a lot of positive outcomes from being able to do that because people have told us they're able to access our counseling services now, because before it may have been too much of a time constraint for them to actually have to travel to our office for in-person sessions. So this has really allowed them the flexibility and the ease of access to be able to engage in counseling.
That's great. Thank you for that information. And I'm sure it also has looked different for your support groups. I wonder if you could speak to that for us, Cathey.
Sure, I'll be glad to, Ryan. And just as Patti said about our individual counseling sessions, our groups have also changed, and we're very grateful that we've learned to use Zoom. And so several clients in our support groups have opted to use Zoom. And the great news is that even if they couldn't use a computer, they are able to use the phone so that our support groups can continue. So that's been a positive. Another way things have changed for us, Ryan, is that in our groups, while we usually focus on many topics based on the type of group, whether it's loss of child or loss of spouse, we are also focusing on the grief that's been exacerbated by the pandemic. For example, we feel like there is additional anxiety and fear that's actually complicating the grief journey in some circumstances. So we like to talk about that and normalize that experience. In all of our groups, we talk about common responses to loss, and individuals in the group get a chance to share what they've been experiencing. They share their challenges as well as focus on the gratitude they are having for the different things that are actually occurring in their lives and all the different strategies they're trying in order to move forward with their lives as well as process these feelings. So I think it's been important for folks to have a forum to be able to talk about the pandemic and their frustrations, their anxieties, and their fears, and also a chance to process that grief and loss as we've always done in the past. Another thing, I thought it would be helpful just to hear a little bit about some of the conversations that we've had in our group. Some of the things that seem to be at the top of folks' minds are, how am I going to have a funeral? And how do I get to honor my loved one in a way that's going to be meaningful for me and that would also be suitable for what his or her wishes were? So we talk a lot about things like, how am I going to spread my loved one's ashes? What is a ceremony I can do that would be meaningful? And so we see individuals learning to be very creative and collaborating with their families to determine ways. Maybe I'm going to do a Zoom session, or maybe I don't think that would really be appropriate for my loved one. I think I'm just going to do a small graveside service. So a lot of these conversations have helped to relieve the anxiety and to show folks that they do have options. Another conversation has been about, how am I going to celebrate those anniversaries or those special dates that my loved one had that I want to continue to commemorate their lives? So we've encouraged clients to have balloon releases, maybe in very small groups, and to maybe, I guess one of my favorite conversations in one of our groups was when a lady was trying to figure out how to celebrate her daughter's birthday. And so she decided to spend a whole day fixing spaghetti sauce. And she took spaghetti sauce, noodles, and bread to all of her family members so that they would be sure to remember her daughter on her special day. So I thought that was a special way and was just a really meaningful way for her to remember her daughter's birthday. Again, we do try to talk about the fact that folks are missing social contact. I think hugs and embraces and handshakes have been missed a lot, and we talk about that in our groups. People are missing their vacations, being able to attend church, graduations, and weddings. And the delay of lots of important activities, I think, have been very difficult. So we talk about all those things. So the groups look a lot the same, Ryan, and yet we've introduced some new topics that we would never have talked about in the past. And one thing that I think is important is as we were looking at things during the pandemic and we decided to start using Zoom technology, we decided maybe there's another way that we can get folks to help each other and encourage one another during this time. So we set up a private Facebook group. And so we encourage you, if you're on the phone and you would like to join, we would love for you to be a part of that group. And this is an opportunity for the three of us to share lots of encouragement and grief ideas, strategies, as well as for folks who are on the grief journey who would like to share. And this has been a really meaningful way for folks to get in touch with each other and to support each other during this time. We had a couple of groups that we've had to put on pause for a while. Two of our favorite groups were it's the men's support group called Strength in Numbers, which meets monthly, and also our Healing Hearts lunch group. So for the interim, this has been put on pause, but we do look forward to returning to those in the near future because, again, in the grief journey, we find that people really want to be part of groups in lots of cases, and it really does help to have that support. So while many have admitted that they really miss that in-person connection and the groups that we've had in the past, they're very grateful to have Zoom technology and the ability to interact during this time.
Thank you for that. Thank you for adapting as bereavement counselors and making yourselves available to folks when they maybe need you most. I'm wondering if, Lesia, could you speak to some of the support groups that are being offered here with Hospice of the Piedmont at this time?
Sure, Ryan. I'm going to lead up into a couple of groups that Cathey and Patti have spoke of. The loss of child and loss of spouse have also continued, and they've continued through the Zoom. But we've also continued Sunset Support Group. And this group is a group that's tailored to discuss different grief topics. This group meets the last Tuesday of every month, running from 6 to 7:30 p.m. On August the 7th, Grief 101 is our one-time orientation class for newly bereaved. This was also offered using Zoom, and it will continue to meet on the first Friday of every month going forward. This class is an excellent opportunity to learn more about common grief responses and coping skills. Additional groups that we've offered or will be offering are Grief Escapes, and this is a monthly class to practice relaxation and renewal, and it will be held August the 26th at noon. Moving forward, it will also be scheduled the last Wednesday of every month. We're also very excited about a new 6-week class that's entitled Next Steps, Moving Forward with Grief. This will be held on Thursday evenings, the last Thursday of the month, from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. This will be starting September the 10th, and the group will allow members to just explore grief a little more in depth. And it's a natural and logical extension to the Grief 101 class that we offer. The topics that are included are understanding the grief experience, handling difficult emotions, caring for the whole self, remembering the person who died, making needed adjustments as one prepares for special occasions, and finding meaning after the loss. For specific details of each particular group. You can find this on our website, or you can call the Grief Counseling Center at the Hospice of Randolph or the Hospice of Piedmont.
Thanks, Lesia. I know you said a lot of dates and times there, so I appreciate you giving the plug to visit the website and get a follow-up for those details. I know all those groups are wonderful places for support for our clients and for the community at this time. I know that stress, anxiety, fear of the unknown, they're all at unprecedented highs right now. And I wonder if, Patti, would you speak to the role that stress and anxiety play in the bereavement process?
Yeah, so losing a loved one can be considered a traumatic stressor. And what I mean by that is that those who have experienced the loss of a significant person in their life can really find it extremely emotionally distressing. And there are a lot of common responses, emotional responses that we see with people who have recently lost a loved one. So I think heightened anxiety may be one, uncertainty, there's fears about the future, just that general feeling of being overwhelmed, and of course sadness, isolation, and then that feeling of losing control. So those are the types of things that you see after experiencing a stressor like that. And I think it's really heightened right now at this time because of pandemic and the other stress that people may be experiencing right now. And I like to tell clients that all of these feelings that I've listed out are all normal responses, right, to loss, and that all feelings are okay, right, and understandable. It makes sense.
I'm so glad to hear that you give people the freedom and the permission to have the feelings they need to feel. I think people need that sometimes. And so I'm grateful that that's something you all value. So I know the Grief Counseling Center supports people of all walks of life, all stages of life. And for example, I know you have an active Kids Path program. Could you tell us how the pandemic has affected children who are grieving? And maybe Lesia, would you take that question for us?
Sure. So like adults, we've noticed an increase in fear and anxiety in some children. With the many challenges, children are adjusting to being at home more and not seeing their friends, and just being unable to interact in person with their teachers, and in many cases, being unable to participate in extracurricular activities. So the transitions for children and adults are very difficult right now. With children spending a lot more time on the computer using virtual school platforms, they've reported just being less excited about learning and have been less motivated to engage. However, in some cases, some children are actually enjoying being at home with their families. They've reported being happy and having time just to be in their own room, playing games with their siblings and parents, and being able to sleep in late have made them excited and happy. In the past, to serve our Kids Path clients, we have relied heavily on play therapy to help counsel the children and to help them process their feelings. So to address the changes imposed by this pandemic, we've had to engage more with children virtually. So we've had to learn to utilize distance learning tools. We've been reading and sharing online books and doing computer activities. We've even mailed grief workbooks to children and just used multiple ways for offering the child a time of expression of their feelings. We've also used art and writing. On a positive note, there's several children who've reported being able to share with their counselors, their rooms, their toys, their pets, and just other items. And this has really helped to build rapport with the child. Counselors have encouraged children to process their grief, doing things like making memory boxes where they can go around their home and pick items that remind them of their loved one who's passed. Time is spent discussing the pandemic and how it's impacting the child's life, and strategies for helping them cope and to work through their anxiety. We as counselors work to normalize the child's experience. As always, counselors are closely communicating with the parents to understand how the children are responding to the grief and any additional stressors that might be brought about by the pandemic. By understanding how the children are responding, we can tailor our sessions to meet the needs and to offer different coping strategies accordingly.
Excellent. I'm going to stay with you for a moment, Lesia. As a grieving parent, how does it look to cope with children who are dealing with these new norms and learning and in socializing, etc.?
Yeah, so as for the grieving parent, many are faced with such an onslaught of emotions that are directly related to their own grief. And they may also be facing many secondary losses that can be related to the COVID situation. So when parents are stressed, sad, and confused, they may have less patience and attention for the things that matter the most to children, like routines, rituals, reassurance, patience, increased attention, and even guidance. So as counselors, we've been encouraging this even more in our time when talking with the parents. Parents are also used to putting kids first, that they sometimes forget to take care of their own personal needs. So, we encourage them to focus in on their personal needs in order for them to meet the needs of the child. So we find that when we encourage parents to set a good example when they're grieving, to express how they're feeling, that even on the tough days that they can grieve together with their child, that a child needs the parent to be as good as they can possibly be, even in a situation where, they're working through grief and loss. And so we encourage them to cry when they need to cry, and to just explain to the child that it's okay for them to cry, while we, feel like that they should definitely share what they're crying about, and share that it's not, related to them, or that the crying is not going to destabilize the life of the child. We just want to normalize that working through grief and loss is something that is okay to do. So we do encourage parents to express the feelings of grief with their children, and to just know that that's okay to do.
Thank you for that. The idea of finding normalization during this time and allowing people to normalize their grief, I'm sure is a challenge to navigate those waters, and to encourage parents to navigate those waters with their children. So I appreciate what you all do. I'm also wondering, as we talk about grief, if grief has changed because of COVID-19. And Cathey, would you be willing to speak to that for us?
Sure. Yeah, unfortunately, grief is still here. And I know some of us wish that it would be a little bit less painful than it is, but let's really define what is grief. Grief is pretty complicated, actually, and it's everything that we think and we feel inside after someone we love dies or leaves, or something we have become attached to goes away. So in other words, grief is that instinctive human response to loss. So Ryan, that is still there. And I think what we're finding is that grief is actually exacerbated in lots of cases, because besides the loss of their loved ones, folks are pretty concerned about the pandemic. and all that's going on in our society today. So we find that people are grieving. And I think it's important to note too, that we don't just grieve emotionally, that we actually grieve in all 5 domains. We grieve physically, spiritually, socially, intellectually, and emotionally. So physical, intellectual, social, spiritual, and social, all of these. I think it's really important for us to understand that, because grief is a big deal and it's pretty complicated. But I think one way that we are seeing that has things that have changed for us, Ryan, are that the ways that we respond to grief. In other words, how we mourn, which is how we put the verb around how we deal with grief, has changed. In a lot of cases where we would hug someone after they've lost a loved one, we're no longer able to do that. So we have different strategies for coping. And so we talk a lot about that in our sessions, just as we talked about before. Something else that has changed is I feel like we have noticed an increase in anticipatory grief. Anticipatory grief is that grief that starts before our loved ones pass away. And a lot of times anticipatory grief will begin the moment that you get the diagnosis about a loved one who has a terminal illness. So we have seen an increase in anticipatory grief for sure. So many of the ways we have found comfort in the past are very different now. So just as we talked about before, I feel like we have to be creative about how we are mourning the loss of our loved ones. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a future question that we're going to discuss.
Thanks, Cathey. As you talk about coping strategies and developing those things, I'm curious if Patti, would you be able to speak to the idea of resilience and how you have found this to be helpful and true with clients?
Yes, so really the definition of resilience is a person's ability to adapt to life's challenges or setbacks. That's a general, broad definition of that. So when individuals have resilience, they're able to harness this inner strength and pull from within themselves. And it really helps them rebound from traumatic experiences, again, such as losing a loved one or being a survivor of a disaster. So resilience really gives people the ability to see past challenges and find joy in life, and really they're better able to handle stress. So that's not to say that those with resilience are not going to experience anger, grief, and pain, right? But they're able to keep functioning physically and psychologically. So thinking about it in terms of resiliency is really what you do, right? You're making those active choices rather than who you are. And you can also think about it as a trait. So that's a trait that you can cultivate, right? You can practice things that will help cultivate resiliency. And instead of thinking about it as a static state of being, just know that it's changeable and you can work on it and practice it. So remembering that rhyme, right, is a trait that you can cultivate.
I'm always a fan of a rhyme, so I appreciate that. A trait that you can cultivate, it's not a status state. That's great. Thank you, Patti. Now that we have resilience defined, I wonder if, Cathey, could you speak to some of the strategies that were alluded to earlier, which are helping cultivate resilience and hope in clients during this time?
Of course. Yes, we hear a lot about hope these days, and so I looked at lots of definitions, and I really became a fond fan of this one. It says, hope is the expectation of a good that is yet to be, an inner knowing that the future holds positive things. And when we have hope, we trust that no matter what's going on around us now with the pandemic and everything that's going on in our world, we still believe in our hearts that the future will have happier circumstances. So I think that's important for us to cling to. And like Patti said, we can cultivate hope. just like she talked about resilience. We have that same opportunity to make a choice every day. So I think it's important for us to remember, just like when we mourn, we have to make an active choice to embrace our grief. I feel like that's important for us now, especially to realize there are lots and lots of ways that we can actually build hope. We can cultivate hope. We can nurture hope and resilience in our lives. So in talking to lots of clients, there are many, many, many ways we can cultivate hope. And one article said 101 ways to cultivate hope. So we're not going to read all of those today, Ryan. So don't get nervous, okay? We're not going to do that. But I am going to give some practical suggestions based on what we've learned and what we're hearing from our clients about things that are really helping them in this time where it seems like there isn't a lot of hope some days, okay? So I hope if you don't hear anything else during our session that you will realize that hope is something that we can actually embrace and that we can make real strides to cultivate that it is a choice. Probably one of the major things we see in the literature and from talking to folks is the fact that a gratitude practice is very helpful. A gratitude practice looks very different for some folks. I know our CEO, Trent, always talks about how he practices gratitude and thinks of 3 things that he's grateful for each day. Some people do that at the beginning of the day, some at the end. Several of our clients are actually writing in gratitude journals. And gratitude, like I said, we talk a lot about in our groups as well in our individual sessions, because a lot of times in our world, we focus so much on the negative and what we need to do that we forget that we have a lot of things that are in our favor. So I think gratitude is an excellent practice in cultivating hope. And it really has been proven to rewire our brains. Researchers have told us that after 21 days, your brain really has been rewired to think more positively. So I think that's really important. Another item, another activity that a lot of our clients have found has been really helpful is to practice mindfulness. And mindfulness is really just being aware of what's going on around us, what we can see, what we can touch, what we can feel. All of these are very important because sometimes we get really lost in our thoughts. So there are several ways that we can practice mindfulness, and some of the most popular ones today are ones that people have on their phones. One is called Calm, and another one is called Insight Timer. And in these apps, they play music, they kind of go through guided meditation and help us just to meditate and just to quiet our minds down in a time where it seems there's a lot going on. Closely related to this is to really limit the amount of time we spend listening to the news. When the pandemic first started, people just wanted to hear every word about what was going on. And now folks have realized that was really making them very anxious. So limiting our exposure to the news, staying mindful of what's going on, obviously, and aware, but not spending too much time in the news and in social media, I think has been helpful for a lot of clients. Another very helpful suggestion we would make is to reach out to others. I have one client who was really struggling in her grief journey, and she said, I've really turned a corner. And I said, well, let's talk about that. Share with me what you feel is different and what's helped you in dealing with your grief as well as the pandemic that's going on. And she said, I realized I need other people. I miss connections. So she made it a point to call people she hadn't talked to in a long time, or to reach out to them via text. I have other clients who have decided to write letters or to send cards. I received a card today from one of my clients, and while she can't meet me in person, she really just wanted to reach out. So those human connections are vitally important right now. And even if we can't see folks in person, I encourage you to use FaceTime, Zoom, Skype, texting, telephones, whatever it is that works for you. I feel like right now we all need as much encouragement as we can. Probably one of my favorite suggestions was from one of our favorite writers, and he has done an amazing amount of work in the grief area. His name is Dr. Alan Wofelt. He's been in practice for over 40 years and has written a multitude of books on grief and loss. And he's always so encouraging, and he's written a lot of great articles already about the pandemic and how it's affected the grief community. Probably one of the most exciting things that he encouraged us to do is if we aren't feeling like we have hope today, and we don't feel like we can even practice some of these strategies, he said, borrow hope from someone else. And I've never heard of that concept. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. How do we borrow hope? And he said to find those people in your life that whenever you talk to them, they just make you feel better. They bring a smile to your face, or they just make you feel better. They bring positive energy. And he said, down the road, because you've borrowed that energy for them, hopefully you will be able to repay that and pay it forward. And as he told us in his article, he said, hope is a renewable resource. So we know that even if we don't feel hopeful today, that we do have the opportunity to choose to be hopeful down in the future. So I'm very, if you hear nothing else, again, I want us to realize that we can be intentional, that we can cultivate hope, and that we can move forward knowing that things are going to be better in the future. And so, again, Ryan, I feel like all of this is in keeping with what we try to do in our groups here at Hospice of the Piedmont and Hospice of Randolph. We're always trying to find that balance between feeling those feelings, like Patti was talking about, and yet after we process, and as we're processing feelings, to think about how do we move forward with our lives too, and to build that hope and to build that resilience. And I just want to encourage everybody that's listening in today, just know that everybody's grief journey is very unique. It is as unique as your fingerprint. And so we encourage you to choose those strategies and to choose those things that help you. And it may not be the same as anybody else in your family, but there are so many ideas and lots of great ways that we can honor our loved ones and commemorate their lives and continue to enjoy our own lives.
Thank you, Cathey. That is all really great information, really great practical ways for the folks listening in on this webinar and all of your clients to really take active steps in cultivating hope. And I wonder if, while we have a live audience, that you consider this question right now. As you have heard Cathey walk through a handful of different cultivating hope strategies, maybe look at this list and choose one that you are already practicing yourself, or one that you would choose to do going forward. There's 10 options here, from calling or texting a family member or friend, to spending time in nature and taking a walk, to looking at photos of families, to expressing your feelings in writing or listening to music. So just take a moment, read through these. Maybe you'd say to yourself, oh, I practice all of these all the time. Or maybe the idea of self-compassion and cultivating these sorts of strategies are new to you, and this is something that you're going to commit to start. So just take a moment and choose one. And maybe as you choose that one, put a stake in the ground and say, and I'm going to do this today, and I'm going to try to do it tomorrow. I'll give you all just one more minute as we wrap up this poll. I see folks still responding, and so I want to give you the opportunity to do so. And maybe you look at these 10 options and you'd say, well, I do something else, but it gives me peace and it helps me find joy, or it helps me find a stable place or normalization. And that's great. You know, feel free to even type that in the chat at the bottom of the screen. And we'd love to hear from you as to what works for you, and we can grow this list. I'll also remind you at this time, as the last few people are responding, that following this poll, we'll be doing a Q&A portion with our bereavement counselors. So if you have a question that came to mind as you've heard them sharing, or maybe you came into this webinar already with a question on your mind that you we'd just love to hear from them about, maybe get some clarity about, maybe hear, if they have a program or some kind of support that would help you. You can type that right now into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and they'll take a moment here in just a minute to respond to those. And of course, if your question is more sensitive or you don't want to type it in, you can always call and follow up at a later date. But it looks like we've had a good number of responses, and so I'm just going to share these results quickly with you. It looks like a lot of you are reaching out to people during this time, making phone calls to a family member or a friend to just connect. And people are listening to music and scheduling just time to be quiet during the day when things are probably noisier than they've ever been, even if they've been, you find yourself more alone or in quarantine or these different things that have made you feel maybe isolated. Finding a quiet space could also be healing. And so thank you for sharing all of these responses with us, and I do hope that you found them helpful. And I will just open the floor one more time for any questions that you all might have. Well, again, this is not the only place that you can ask questions, and I hope that you will feel the freedom to follow up with any number of these bereavement counselors as they make themselves available to the community and to clients alike. If there are no questions, I will just wrap up our time together. I appreciate you, Cathey, Patti, and Lesia, for all this incredible and insightful information. And we thank you all for joining us today for our E-Series webinar on cultivating hope in challenging times. Oh, we do have one question. Oh, no, we don't have any questions still. But we appreciate the feedback. Our hope is that some of this information and the strategies shared by our bereavement counselors have been helpful to you during these uncertain times. If you or someone you know in the community or a loved one is struggling to move forward with their grief related to a loss of a loved one, we encourage you to contact the Grief Counseling Center at either location in Asheboro or High Point. Our bereavement counselors would be glad to serve you and walk with you through whatever you're experiencing. If you're interested in hearing more about our organization and how you can get involved personally, I invite you to join us in 2 weeks on September 4th for our next E-Series webinar. You'll hear more about how to do that and how to find a place in our organization yourself. And so we hope that you would consider joining us in 2 weeks, September 4th. Again, on behalf of Hospice of the Piedmont and Hospice of Randolph, thank you all for joining with us, and I hope you have a great day.